I am very honored to be here, and I thank you very much, Anne, Lorraine as well, who came to the airport to collect us yesterday, Mary, who has done so much, Jen, who has been so kind. Thank you so much for this opportunity. It's the only thing that actually got me out of bed this morning. I come to the arts from, of course, different positionalities, as Anne was saying. Can you hear me? I do have a drama voice. However, it is hard because I don't want to pierce that man's eardrums.
I wonder if there are a microphone, if you could use it.
The microphone only pierces his eardrums. I can pierce yours with my own voice. Is that better? All right. Yes, we did learn the drama voice to project. So I shall project. I'm not well, so there's something fuzzy going on in my head, but I will try to remember the drama voice. So I come from a different space, and the way in which I'm going to be looking at the arts today may be very similar to the ways in which you look at them, and they may be very different. So I hope I can bring something that aligns with what it is you understand, but also contributes or adds to how you understand the arts. From a very vast, very complex, very diverse country. I do not speak on behalf of the arts in Canada. I will only speak to what I know and the women and men with whom I have worked, although this will be particularly about the women today with whom I have worked. But before I get started and talk to you a little bit more about how I came to where I am, I'd like to just know who you are. I want to hear your voices just for a moment, please. So what I'd like you to do is say your name and then quickly how you're associated with the arts in any form. So I'm going to start at this table.
My name is Michael.
Welcome. Thank you. Well, many of your backgrounds certainly touch upon my own. Tomorrow, and there's a workshop on community-based research where I'll be talking about working with street-involved and homeless women. I've worked with different kinds of populations across the country. I began as an adult educator. The field of adult education is, for those of you who understand it, probably don't need to hear this, but for those of you who wonder what I mean, adult education is divided into training and upgrading skills jobs and computer upgrading skills, those sorts of things, and night classes. And then there's a critical social bent to it, where the aim is to change the world through using education as a social force. And that is where I align myself. So I have been working with different communities across Canada, connected to and away from the university since the 1980s. And I always used the arts in the workshops and things that I did, but I used it very peripherally. And by that I mean that sort of between the important discussions, we would do something creative. But that was between the critique and the trying to sort out the world. So it was used more for leisure or an interlude, something fun, levitating. So my opinion of them were that they were very, very important, but that they had their place. I had not really encountered the power and potential of them yet at that time. And it began in many ways, but one of the instances in particular was at a women's march in 1995. Now, I don't know how many of you have ever been to women's marches, but there were 30,000 women and children there. So you have a juxtaposition of people with placards screaming for justice and peace and to change the world, and you have frankfurters gushing and balloons and perambulators and every other paraphernalia with children, right? So it's political and it's personal and it's everything going on all at once. And as we were marching by the U.S. Embassy screaming about Iraq and everything else that we were doing and flapping ourselves around being very, very militant, the police were there, as they always are, dressed in full riot gear. It is also another juxtaposition and a paradox, which is difficult to understand with this flow, this sea of women and children going by. But nevertheless, there they are. And they're leaned up against their motorcycles, and they're looking at us, yawning, looking at their watches as this sea of defiance goes by. And at one point, someone came by on stilts and said, "There's going to be a puppet show over here if people would like to come." And I looked, and every single police officer got up on his feet, and I could hear walkie-talkies, they're grasping truncheons, they're pulling their helmets down, and one's going, "Puppets, puppets, puppets, move!" And I'm thinking, have I lost my mind? Have they? What is going on here? Why, with all the screaming and placards and everything else that we were doing, the chanting, the music, the everything else, did nothing stop them? Did nothing startle them until there was a puppet show? And then I watched them blocking children and women. You know, they're big, right? They're in the way like this. They're moving. They're trying to push people away like that. They're trying to get over to the puppeteers. I'm talking puppets. Do you know that? What a puppet is? I'm talking puppets. I'm not talking about big, huge puppets that maybe you could get an AK-47 underneath. Probably not with that many children in the room or in the space would anybody have done that. But nevertheless, I am talking about puppets. And I was absolutely astounded at that. And I've thought it over for years of how that could be possible. How do you suddenly make a difference with something, a puppet? What did they see? What did they know that I didn't know? That I thought it was just a nice little puppet show? What did they know that I didn't? Well, of course, we all know what they know. They know about the power and the potential and the way in which this is going to engage people very, very differently from the shouting and the stamping and the walking and the usual kind of activism. And that has changed everything for me and set me on a course of investigating what it was that the women and men in my country were doing to scare the authorities. So that's where I'm going to leave that, and then I'm going to move into a discussion about some of these arts practices. I'm going to talk now. Please don't be a pain. Did that move? No. Okay. Technology is a wonderful thing. It just doesn't work. I'm going to talk about something called, it's got its head cut off. Well, that'll happen a lot. About community arts. And I noticed some people were saying, using the term community arts, but I was actually talking with Jen, and there are a lot of other terms that are used, such as creative communities. There's a lot of different ways of talking about these, but the one in Canada, the term in Canada that we use most predominantly is community arts or community-based arts. So that's what I'm going to use. But when you're thinking about your own work, you'll see that there are probably quite a few connections that I'm going to be making. So what I'm talking about is a collaboration between artists and self-defined community groups, communities or neighborhoods to advance artistic and community goals using participatory and creative processes. I'm talking about from creation to completion and guided by a collective vision. And that's where I'm talking about community-based artists rather than artists in community. They are both equally valuable and necessary, but they are two different entities. The artist in community often brings art into community. The community-based artist works with the community to develop their own art. That's how I'm differentiating the two. You may understand those words differently, but that's how I'm trying to show the difference between the different kinds of artists that are out there. There are a lot of different ways in which artists engage with the public. They are all of equal value, but I'm going to be talking about community-based artists who are working collectively with different groups. That makes sense. Also recognizing I am using this term community, I am problematizing, we must always trouble this concept. This is not an easy word, community. As you know, as you work out there, you realize there is no homogeneity. There is static. There is negotiation and renegotiation. There is who is community, who is not community, what forms part of it. Often when we talk about community, we're not necessarily talking about business. Some people are talking about business. So community is a very complex term. So when I say the word community, know that I know that this is not simple. It's very courageous to be out working with communities because it is so complex. If it was easy, the world would be a very different place from what it is. And so a primary issue is to reposition culture, and some of you were talking about from an object of consumption to an act of collective production. I have glasses on, glasses off. I notice, fortunately, that some of you are my age. Do you get that? The rest of you will get that. Have something to look forward to. There's a lot. So what I'm interested in is the intentionality. So an educative process that is intentional. There's a shift in adult education to the concept of learning, to the concept of lifelong learning. Those are powerful terms. They are important in their own context. When you're working towards social change, you want to be associated with an intentionality. So it is not an education in that I know and you don't, and a didactic process of delivery, but it is an intentionality to change the world. You mean to do something, and you mean to do it through education. Does that make sense? Yeah. So it's based on working and learning collectively through artistic processes or informed processes, arts-informed processes, arts-based processes. We in Canada define and differentiate between arts-informed and arts-based, as then arts-based is often, almost always exclusively associated with an art form, a genre, such as music, such as quilting or crafts even, but it uses a particular genre, painting, that you would understand as art. So that more limited idea. Arts informed uses a creative process. So let me give you an example. There was a woman working in the field of Alzheimer's, and she was exploring, she wanted to creatively represent what Alzheimer's meant in the life of her mother. So she used a clothesline. Now, a clothesline is not always associated with an art genre. Right? A clothesline is maybe artistic, but it's not a genre. But what she did is she started out her clothesline with nappies, and then she went to toddler's pants, and then she went to teen pants, and then she went to sort of older women's pants, and then she went all the way back to nappies to show the process of losing one's life. So that's, by arts informed, that's what I mean, if that makes sense. So when in Canada, that's how we try to differentiate. There's a lot of murky back and forth in all of this, that it's not that, but in order to try to make sense of what it is that I'm talking about, I'm trying to set it up for you so it makes a little bit more sense of what it is. So the education does all of these cultural identities, getting people to think about themselves culturally. Some of you were talking about cultural democracy, the right to be involved in the arts, whether you're disabled, whether you're people of color, wherever you come from, whether you're women, whatever spectrum, whatever diversity, that you have the right to engage in and create to promote new forms of consciousness and knowledge, and that's in particular what I'm interested in, whilst also recognizing that people have knowledge. There's an awful lot of, we're going to raise people's awareness because they don't know and they don't have the knowledge of these kinds of things. There is a very, very knowledgeable group out there, and you ignore that at your peril. So you want to draw out that knowledge and understanding of the world as best you can. You need to trouble it, challenge assumptions, but never underestimate the intelligence in a community. Surge, so encouraging critical and social reflection is in particular what I'm interested in. Stimulate engagement, of course, and deal with issues that exclude, marginalize, and disempower. Recognizing that, of course, power is multiple. We are never completely powerless and we are never completely powerful. There is too much complexity in the concept of power as well. So arts-based adult education then would recognize the educator as having the courage, what Paulo Freire, some of you maybe, if you're involved in community development, you've probably heard of the Brazilian Paulo Freire, which he called the courage to teach. So that is the intentionality of that, but also acting as a guide, a facilitator, a challenger, a risk taker, and a learner all at the same time. Not easy to do. Engaging the aesthetic dimension to enhance the transformative and democratic and emancipatory objectives of community development and learning initiatives. Provokes creative visions of an alternate world, that things can be different, that we can make a difference. The sense of powerlessness is probably, anger is challenging to work with, but it's at least a passion. Passion is easier to work with than there isn't anything we can do, nothing will ever change, it doesn't matter. That's a difficult one. That's the one I find the arts can particularly provoke. Arts-based adult education is a journey without maps. There is no way of doing it. We've written books on it, and I still, when people say, well, how do you do it? I don't know. I have no idea. Get out there and do it. Trust in the process. Trust in the product. There's been a lot of, the process is, to me, equally powerful as the product. We've moved a little bit away from the idea of the product because the product has always been overwhelmingly powerful. But there are instances, which I may be able to have a chance at the end, when the product really does matter. It makes a huge difference to have a good product at the end. So I place, and the women who I talk about and work with, place equal value on the product and the process for different reasons. So keep that in mind. Challenge those who ignore both, who ignore one at the other's peril too. So let me tell you the stories, a couple of stories, because it's the stories of the work that matter. So this is called, see, it's got its head off too, the Positive Energy Quilts. This project is called the Positive Energy Quilts, and it was made by a group of people from Gabriola Island and Nanaimo in British Columbia. Now, I live in Victoria on an island. The island is the size of England, because we're talking about a country that's so big. So it's the size of southern England, if you can think about it, probably the size of southern Ireland. Takes 8 hours to get from one end of the island to the other. Gabriola Island and Nanaimo are halfway up. The protest, the challenge was to create something to challenge the construction of a gas-fired power plant on the Vancouver Island at Duke Point near Nanaimo. I love my country, but I can honestly tell you right now that Canada is the global pariah in terms of the environment. What we are putting into the air through we're not allowed to call it the tar sands, so I didn't say that. The oil sands is despicable at best. And there are many Canadians, I'd just like you to know, who are working very hard to change that. But it is slow, and it's Canada. So at that time, BC Hydro wanted to put in this plant. BC Hydro is a crown corporation. That means, as the Aboriginal people say, it belongs to the Queen's hat. But it's a crown corporation. And there were many different things going on and BC Hydro's argument was that if they did not build this plant, this was a few years ago, this project, that there would be massive blackouts and brownouts. We would be left with, there would be a virtual Armageddon of wattage. There would never be any lights again in the entire province. But a lot of people were objected to the power plant, and they were very nervous. The other complication to all of this kind of thing is that this is an area of high unemployment. And BC Hydro and the two U.S. corporations that were involved in this were promising jobs, jobs, jobs. That is a very difficult thing for people who are unemployed, to face a situation where they could find employment, and it would be good employment, but then to realize what that employment would mean. So the corporation was playing fast and loose with the rules and what exactly was going to be happening. So as I said, we desperately need this electricity. This was a collaboration between Canada and the U.S. It's a depressed area. Kristen Miller attended one of the meetings. The community decided that they needed to mobilize against this plant because they didn't want it. The plant had already been stopped in another part of the island, and they wanted to stop this as well. Now, Kristen was a professional quilter who had never been politically active in her entire life. She writes these beautiful books on how to quilt, and the most radical thing that she had ever done was to use green thread once when she was supposed to use red thread. So that shows you where she was on all of that. So she was placed on the Community Outreach or Education Subcommittee, and for 15 minutes, as she said, I kept wondering how I could get off this committee, and then I thought, I know, we can make quilts. Sorry, we can make quilts. That shows you I have the flu. And so I told them that to the group, and they thought I was mad at first. The problem was, as she states here, is that when you run up against these corporations, they have all the statistics. They have the research, the statistics, every way of showing you how this is going to be in your favor and benefit you. So there is no way that you're going to be able to argue with these crown corporations in Canada simply by the same statistics. So my statistics beat your statistics. Science matters, but not everything is a matter of science. So you have to find other ways, and that's what this group was trying to do. So they pulled together a group of activists, the Raging Grannies. You've probably heard of the Raging Grannies as a Canadian. It's a group of elderly women who wear elderly activists in sensible shoes, as they call themselves. Quilters, visual artists, and other concerned friends and citizens. So in order to make this an interesting project, they could have just walked around and they could have made quilts themselves. That would have been quite simple. But what they did is they disseminated squares of cloth to schools, community and non-governmental organizations, arts and cultural institutions, homes for the elderly, to try to get people. And the question that they were sending out was, how do you feel about the construction of this power plant? How does it make you feel? Not what do you know about it necessarily, although that, of course, knowledge comes into feelings are not disconnected from knowledge. 50 squares were returned, and the images and ideas in opposition. So then they had all these different pieces. Now, there was a lot more squares that were sent out, but people didn't make their square, and then they don't want to give their square up, because it's a piece of art and they love it, and so you can't wrestle it out of them. So what do? You just go with what it is that you have. But now you have a series of individual stories, but you need to make a community story. So then you needed to put the quilts together. And of course, there was a lot of tension, as Kristen says. She says, oh, but there was a lot of tension in that room. We had artists and activists and quilters, and they were worried that it was not going to be very quilty. So we've got people who are concerned about the product and people who are concerned about the process. But once, as they were making the quilts, they decided that they would engage in something called quilting in public. Because they could have stayed home and put these squares together, but if you want to make an impact and you want this to be an educational process and you want to engage people, then you have to move into where the public is. So they quilted. They quilted outside cafes and galleries. Those are safe spots. But to make a larger political point, they quilted in front of the building where BC was. Hydro hearings were taking place. This is the Crown Corporation. It has to legally hold these public hearings. So they're consultation meetings, but of course, the consultation is always in the favor of the consultor. So what happened there was a lot of different kinds of things as they were doing that. Nothing happened in front of the cafes and the galleries, although they did have an opportunity to talk to a huge number of people. As people passed by, were coming in. But when they were in front of the BC Hydro building, that was when the first time, as Christian said, the police noticed us. People, I don't know about Ireland, maybe it happens all the time, but there's not a lot of quilting in public in Canada. But it is legal. You will be happy to know that you actually can legally quilt in public, so the police went on their way. But BC Hydro officials were not very happy about this at all. And they would come out and they would go, no, you have to move that one. No, get that one out of here. No, you have to fold that over. No, you can't just fold that over. You've got to get that into your trunk of your car. And they were trying to censor this art in ways that was quite astounding and extraordinary. Because they knew that people were coming by and talking to them, and they were stopping because of the quilts. The quilts were attracting media attention. Everything was going on. And so they were very, very cognizant of the fact that I don't care if you sit here, I care if they sit here. And that's what they were talking about, the quilts. So there was so much confinement. They were actually thrown out of, they made their way into one of the hearings. They actually made their way into the room before the hearing started and put the quilts all up around the room. And then when the BC Hydro officials got in, they got kicked out so fast. You've never seen anything move so quickly in all your life. Never do that. Never make a scene, because the media loves a scene. So, of course, the media was on it like that. The media just come to, another mundane hearing. Oh, my goodness. And all of a sudden, these women are being thrown out the door and quilts are flying and everything's happening. The media had a heyday. They just don't do it. No, just if you're going to be a politician, stay quiet in public. Don't let the media get you. So there's a lot of different things going on in these quilts. A lot of different ways of people reflecting on how they understand, the ways in which they know their community, the ways in which they felt it would affect them. Some people wanted to support more sustainable energy. Other people, of course, were more interested in the impact that this might have on their children. For other people, it was about health. For some people, it was about losing the value of their home and losing the value in their community. For the artists, some of the artists, I'm trying to find different ways of using my art as a political statement. So there are a number of different ways of understanding this. Some of the more artistic kinds of pieces, because some are very political, some are very artistic, which is this one where she collected a leaf and sewed the real leaf, but then the leaf got all crumpled and started to fall apart. And that became part of the message, the crumbling of community, because this was there's a lot of tension in the community around this plant. So there was a lot of falling apart. Some people recognized it as about the corporations and about money and eating up the land. That's a little change purse. You've seen those little children's change purses? It's got teeth, though. I like it. Some things were about the politics of what Canada is doing, the way in which we are infecting the rest of the world. The air you breathe, we are destroying it for you. We are making it very unpure. More on the corporations, more of an understanding of more of a political understanding. Money and power behind all of this. Power used, of course, as a pun. knowledge. Do you know what comes out of the stacks of a gas-fired power plant? That person did. So that's the other idea around what it is that people actually know and how they know things. So they were actually able to articulate, and it was important for that kind of knowledge because there was a lot of other things. There was a couple of Americans in the group, so they, of course, went after their own country. For some quilters, the most galling part of Hydro's plan was the involvement of the U.S. partners, because actually what they found out was that the Hydro was not going to stay in Canada. They were going to build pipelines and send it to the United States. So what was this all about in terms of the Armageddon of wattage? What was this really about? Did we need the energy? Or was it going somewhere else? As I said, it was their goal. In terms of artistic, in terms of the right to be artistic, one of the debates, and BC Hydro really engaged in this one, and I alluded to it before, is about the steam that would come out of these plants. These women depicted, as you can see coming across in this one, black, sort of grayish smoke. BC Hydro said it would only be white. And they took real offense to the inaccuracy of this. But what they were arguing, what the women argued, is that all the different compounds that were in it were toxic. And that's what they were representing, was the toxicity of this, not the actuality of the color of the steam. So this was representational of that, because there's a fine line. There's when you're dealing in these political spheres about what is right and what is wrong and what is intentional and who knows and who has the right terms and who has the right ideas. And so when you start to do things that are representational and trying to talk about inaccuracy, then you can be challenged, and they were very much by a corporation. You're thinking, well, it's a silly little quilt square. It was not a silly little quilt square to them. None of this project was a silly little project. They took this very, very seriously. And it made a huge difference. So people really talked about the impact that it had on them and why taking part in it had been empowering, just in terms of just creating a small little square, or whether it was part of the group that sewed it together or whether it was just making a square. The impact on people was quite astounding. Willingness, they talked about willingness, patience, cooperation, struggle, fights about whether it was quilty or not. And that these are the building blocks that are healthier for all of us. So the project really it challenged an inequity, and that was the power that the corporation had to name what was important and what would happen in a community. It visually illuminated controversy and paradox. It was local yet global in its understanding and the way it depicted the world. There was a critical and reflective consciousness that had to go into thinking about how to create these squares and what to say on them. A space of irony, bathos, and ambiguity. What inhabits that world better than the arts? Expressed often silent human-earth relations, ways in which we understand the relationship that we have to the earth, but we don't necessarily talk about out loud. Artistic identity, so for people to be able to be artists, to be involved in this, these quilts were very, very public. They were worn, they were put up in art galleries, they were worn in protest marches, they went everywhere. They were a dialogue between the viewer and the image. You made the quilt. Each time you see those images, you remake that quilt into something different. And it was inclusive of a number of different people who would not, particularly people who would not necessarily be involved in political protest. But it allowed and gave them an opportunity to speak. It grabbed media attention, as I said. Wyman wrote a wonderful book called The Defiant Imagination. And there was a lot of defiance and resistance in this project. Reclaimed a public space to quilt in public. And mobilized people for action. It involved censorship and risk-taking. They were thrown out. They were tried to be publicly humiliated. It was fun, and it helped bring about change. Do you want to know what happened? BC Hydro pulled the deal off the table. And the lights are still on.